African leaders are fighting their level best to become horribles rather than honorables. They should focus more on creating successful successors.
Great infrastructures, say the roads, the industries, the hospitals, the schools, they built while they existed. Talk about the castles and forts and buildings and all the mansions and towers they built while they existed. Talk about the beautiful things that they done. Talk about the speeches they made while they existed. Talk about the exciting vision and passion and purpose that they had while they are still alive. Talk about their energy that drove their initiative. Talk about everything that they did while they are still alive. Wow, I can say everything was just wonderful and marvelous in their existence. But today, after their departure, everything crumbled into pieces. And what I can say is that the buildings that they built are now just places that have even germinated grasses. The buildings are now torn apart. The roads are now like gardens, and the economies that they built are now weak. And what I can say is that they left to us civil wars and fighting that their descendants turned into after their departure. On our show, we are having Serianga Henry. He's a strong man, a very great man, a human rights activist, an advocate, and he's always never afraid to speak about issues that really matter to the African people. He's so enthusiastic, he's a Pan-African. Uh, he's never always silent about the things that the irritating politicians always do. And to his view, he says that Africa is the greatest land that has ever existed, and it is the cradle of all civilizations in the world. Mr. Seriang, it's grateful to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Collins. I'm really so honored in Bridge to have been chosen to present this to the rest of my fellow humankind. And I think everything that we shall talk about may nourish the content or the mind of our fellow Africans in a wider view.
We are talking about legacy. We've seen very many people in our society right now and in the world today. Most of the people focus more on building buildings, they focus more on everything. People, if I can say, the great African men and presidents built great economies that history shall live to remember. Talk about Muammar Gaddafi, who built an economy that had free education, free healthcare, infrastructures were working very well, industrialization was also emerging. But after his departure, after his death, all his success crumbled, and his ancestors have now depleted it. And if I can say, right now, his country is one of the worst countries in Africa, despite that it was once the greatest nation. Why is it that after the departure of these leaders, everything seems to crumble? Why is it that things cannot be? What's wrong with the people who succeed?
To my own understanding, and as far as concerned in my context, I do not refer to creation and building of legacy. I do not refer it to economies, infrastructures, and other developments in any country. To me, what I refer to as creation of a strong legacy is the prevailing of a fellow's ideas, dreams, and wants from one generation or from his generation to another. Unless, if I'm to say, if buildings, economies, infrastructures, and other developments were part of the creation of the legacy, actually, Kano Muammar Gaddafi of Libya wouldn't have been remembered by this time, because all his energy was wasted for what I can say has nothing, because all he left as physical has been put down by the bombings in Libya. We have several governments in Libya Libya is torn apart. Libya is torn into pieces by the war. So if infrastructures were a cornerstone in determining one's legacy, that means legacy of Kanuma Gaddafi wouldn't have been talked about even by this moment, because all he left has been perished. So by the perishing of one's achievement, of one's physical achievement, that means the legacy has been sabotaged. So what I can refer to as creation of legacy is one's enforcement for his idea to prevail in the next generation after him. So that's what I refer to as legacy to my own context of understanding.
You said that most of the people always focus on buildings, and that is not the measure of one's success. So, what do you think is the measure of true success? What do you think should people concentrate on as they are beginning? Should they concentrate, because most of us would like to have uh, very great companies, good cars, nice houses, and everything? What do you think should be the major focus for the people? Let's take it personal now.
What I think most of people who have rose to prominence should put into consideration for their legacy, companies, public wealth, infrastructures can come in later. But to my context is that they should focus more on creating successful successors before physical wealth and physical infrastructures. I think they should focus more on creating successful successors.
So you mean that before someone, at the start of someone's vision, when someone is pursuing to create an organization and company, they should first identify who is going to succeed over the success they are aiming at creating, and they groom them such that by the time they leave, their legacy can be able to be carried on to the next generation.
Yes, why am I saying this? It is because without a successful successor, all your energy, all your ideas, all your inputs are for nothing. Because this is what makes Africa lag behind. We have insatiable greed for wealth. If it isn't that, we should focus more on creating who is going to take our responsibilities after we leave. That's the most thing that we Africans especially fear. We fear to create successors because we think that within a time of our living, these people might conquer us, might take over us, which is not the case. If we can create successful successors, or if we can mentor people who are to walk into our steps after we resigning or we after leaving office, at least that could be better. Because if your system has been so good and you've trained a person who is going to take in after you leave, at least that would be so very nice of you than gathering public wealth, creating companies which are eventually going to collapse after you leave or your resignation.
Now, most of the people here in Africa, they always fear what I can say opposition. Whenever they see someone emerging with good creativity, good innovation, and good work, they find ways of suppressing them. When they are given an opposition, let me say that they are CEO, they actually make sure that they silence all peoples that make themselves so competent in the company so that they can make themselves uh, always the greatest ones. They even brand themselves and create conditions that make themselves to be portrayed as the alpha, the omegas. Sometimes I even had one of the African presidents who proclaimed himself as president for life, and most of them they don't want to leave power. Can you imagine? Only to find that death has claimed their lives and all their legacy goes into waste because of the people that they have left have not been trained to carry it on. What can you tell to the African people out there who believe that for them they shall live forever, and who believe that those who oppose them are actually their greatest enemies?
The message I can carry to most of African leaders or to all African leaders as per moment is that by suppressing your competitors is getting your legacy, is getting all what you have done and burying it into a pit hole. Because without competitors, or what I can refer to as opposition, you can easily lose track. Actually, if they are to understand, they should put this in mind that opposition or competitors help you create a legacy, because without them, you end up becoming a dictator. In this context, in referring to legacy, because legacy is into parts. You might create a negative legacy or a positive legacy. But what African leaders, or all politicians, all people who are in places of influence, what should they put in place is this: is that by having opposition or competitors is helping you not to lose track, or it is helping you to create a positive legacy, because you have something that you are worried about. In this context, you will not lose the track. You will stay focused, because these people are there to remind you that Mr. President, Mr. CEO, Mr. So and so, by the time of your rising to power, you said you will do this and this and this. Now we are seeing you're losing track. Brutality has become order of the day. Such and such negative acts have become order of the day. So in this, they are reminding you, they are not threatening you to take your position. If at all you can like correct those mistakes that they are trying to point at, you can go back to the track.
Now
Hence creating a better
let's go
legacy.
back to the issue of mentorship and creating a legacy. Most of the people with companies, especially the young people who have just created companies, let me say that they are at the age of 30, they think that they are still young to mentor. Is mentorship only for the old people? Because if I can say, one of the great leaders of Africa, Kwame Nkrumah, died at a very young age while he was still, I can say, a youth, maybe below the age of 40, if I'm not mistaken. Talk about Patrice Lumumba, all these people. It seems like death has no age, it has no age. It takes everyone at every point of life. So when should people mentor?
You've answered it, that death has no age. So if after that coming into your mind when you are in a place or in a position of influence, automatically by the time you rise to that position of influence, when you understand that you are in a position of influence, that's when you should start mentoring the generation to come after you. So particularly mentorship of people who will take on your legacy has no age, has no time. By the time you rise to a position of influence, that's when you are supposed to start nurturing, mentoring people who are going to carry on your legacy. That is it.
So now, most of the people here, especially in Africa, whenever they have started any organization, let me say let me go back to the previous question that they always find ways. If there is anyone, any young worker who is actually doing better, who is actually innovative and bringing new solutions, they find ways of suppressing them so that they make themselves the central point of knowledge, so that everyone consults them. Only to find that when they die, since they have made themselves the fountain of knowledge, and now this fountain of knowledge has left the companies is going to collapse. What can you tell these people who think that they will live forever? Who think that those people who are actually coming up are actually threatening you and they should be suppressed and you should make yourself like God? Let me see, because
Making yourself a fountain of knowledge, as earlier as I said, is burying your legacy. If at all your mind is focused on creation of a legacy, then you shouldn't make yourself a fountain of knowledge, because we are all humans. No one doesn't make mistakes. So all of us are entitled to make mistakes, because that's what we are. That's the nature of humanity. So if we are to create legacies, we are not supposed to make ourselves the center of knowledge. No one is a monopoly of knowledge. No one is an epitome of knowledge. We should admit and we should accept to be advised, to be corrected where there is a problem, and all that. In all that, we can do something that is going to live on from one time to another or from one generation to another. So, back to the question of mentorship and legacy. We are supposed to have goals from the beginning of our careers, because when we talk of people who have tried to build their legacies, though they are not on living for a long time, I'm talking of the Pan-Africans of our mother continent. They knew that they are something to their communities, and they are supposed to add something to their communities. So when you look at all of these people, they were assassinated as a tool of putting Africans down. They were assassinated by the Western influence, but none of them was above 50. They were in their early 30s and 40s. So how comes that they were able to build legacies? It is because they realized that they are in places of recognition, so they acted as they could, so that's the reason as why even up to now we still remember some of them.
So now let's take it big as far as Africa, as we are coming to the conclusion of this. Most of the African presidents that we've seen, uh, they have built great things. But now, if I can say, we can only remember that in the books of our history. But as in current experience, it is no more. The people who succeeded actually blundered, and we are not able to manage the wealth that they created to their best level.
Collins, you're forgetting one thing, that these people we are talking of, or we are talking of their legacy, were assassinated. Reason being that
But
they were putting,
why couldn't they
listen,
recognize that anytime they are going to die, this is what you're talking about? These people think they are going to live forever.
then we wouldn't be talking about them right now. They tried to create some legacy of which we are basing on to talk about them right now. But you are forgetting one thing, that these people were assassinated by Western influences. That means that even the people that were left to carry on their legacies have been pulled from our motherland to the Western countries. So when they reach there, they are foreigners in those countries. So they have to adapt to the norms. So eventually they end up losing the track of their original creators and succumb to the ways of the Western powers. So legacy is something that should be put in the ideas of so many people in order to carry them to the next generation. Because when you look at the folk stories of our motherland, they are carrying information from one generation to another. So if all African leaders can input their ideas into the younger generation, even if you are assassinated after spreading your ideas into the generation, that means your legacy will live forever. Take an example of writers and authors of books. They put, they realize that they cannot impact their ideas into their fellow human beings. So they decide to put down their ideas on books. So their legacies stay forever, because a book, when it is not physically destroyed, it can live for centuries and centuries. So that means that their ideas have been left behind. They are not buried with their ideas. That's what I told you in the beginning, that legacies and success are not measured on infrastructures, because after all, after your departure, these things can collapse. But when you put something into writing and it has very rightful people to control them, that means your legacy will live forever. Because whoever will read that text, or whoever will get that information from where you have recorded it, that means he will have to live on with it, your legacy. Hence, you're determining your success.
So buildings collapse, but people don't collapse, ideas don't collapse. So in most of the cases.
People also corrupt. But when you leave ideas behind, they can be fed. Ideas are fed into people. People fed. The only thing that we have to do, if at all we have come across a certain idea somewhere, we need to put it into the next generation. We can do this by either recording it through writing. You can either record a video and leave it behind. You can either record an audio and leave it behind for the next generation to feed
So,
onto that
which means that it
idea.
is an obligation for all the people. Let me say they are beginning companies,
If at
leaders,
all you
to
are
write
at
and to document and to keep memories and history
if at all
there.
you are at a position of influence, it is your obligation.
Even if it is the father of a family.
Yes, it is your responsibility. It is your obligation to leave ideas behind. Because when you don't leave these ideas behind, you're going with them to the grave, and the community is losing the word.
Okay, so as you've said now that success should be, people should write and document. It doesn't only stop at leaders of countries, it doesn't stop at authors. Even if you're a father, you are what you should document and leave a history for your children's children to read so that you can create a lasting legacy. So now, in most of our countries here in Africa, people are condemned from reading historical books and things of long ago, saying that these are no longer relevant in this current experience. Actually, most of the leaders actually are advising young children to take on science and and technology, which I can't ignore as a big step to development. But we've seen that much as we can build all these great things, but without books and ideas, they can't prevail. But much as we've taught young children to study science, to study technology, still we have not seen any success in here in Africa materializing. Most of them, after finishing to graduate from school, they go to outside countries and they use from there. Even they don't love their own countries. So, what is the relevance of history to the present? Because I saw that histories of the present, it passed and the people died and it's no longer important. So, what can you tell to those people who condemn history as relevant and we need science more?
African leaders, especially, are trying, or they are fighting their level best to become horribles rather than honorables by advising, by facilitating, by implanting the adaptation of technology to the younger generation, which is not bad. It is a very good step. But look at this scenario, you're forgetting one thing. In order to determine your future, you should be well equipped with your past. So adaptation of technology is not bad, but if you do not know the background of the technology, that means the present is dead and the future is also at the same time dead.
Now, let me cut you short. Most of the young children here, they have not been taught about any history about Africa, and they would rather actually go to the outside countries to work from there, in the mindset that Africa is actually poor. Some of them they hate their skin color. Some of them they hate to identify themselves as Africans. Others, other young children hate to identify themselves with their cultural names. Can you imagine? Now, what can so I'm now seeing where you are going that history is relevant in developing Africa because these people, as we are dumping history, we are actually building development for other people. So, what is the importance of Africa, and what is it that is good about the African history that the young children need to know in order to be equipped to develop Africa and to become children for Africa, Ugandans for Uganda, and Uganda for Ugandans?
Only that African history has been buried into the grounds by the Western powers. But the younger Africans who are willing to develop our mother continent, Africa, should put in their mind that Africa has her own history and a good history.
Really?
It is a good history. So we are just being given clips of our own history. But what I can tell the young generation and the generations to come is that Africa has history and good history. It is our responsibility to look for that history because it is recorded somewhere. It is our obligation to get that history, read it, such that we know where we came from to secure our present as well as to secure our future. You know, Collins, there is nothing as dangerous as lacking information about your own self. It is a self-destruction if you do not have information about yourself. Take an example. If you raise up one morning when you have lost your memory, you don't even still your name, you don't even still remember your name, but you are just there, you are seeing yourself existing, you don't know even the country where you are. Do you think you have a purpose in such a life and in such a country? Exactly, you don't have a purpose. So that means by a mere lack of information of our own African history is a total destruction to our motherland. Africa has had history. We have the Great Walls of Motapa, we have the pyramids of Egypt, all those writings, all those drawings in the pyramids of Egypt. We have our warriors, we have the Zulu warriors, the Azande people. So all that is our own history. So when you rise up one morning when you don't have any clips about such a good history, we have those walls in Zimbabwe. They are 4 times longer than the Great Walls of China. But we know so much about the Great Walls of China than those walls of Zimbabwe. That means our history is being buried by foreign countries. So we need to unbury that history from the soil and we learn about it. We put it into our minds if we are to put Africa at the next step.
So you mean that Africa has a history that is good, that is good enough for young children to take pride in?
Actually, for your own information, some of Africa's history has been shifted and given to the European history. So things or to the Western history, things that would have helped us to focus more or to look for more of our history have been taken, because when I mentioned about the oldest skull that was found in Tanzania, present day Tanzania, which was Tanganyika by then. So that skull is not on the continent of Africa. It is existing, but it is not on the continent of Africa. That means so many Africans have been denied a chance due to the costs of expense to go and look at that skull. But if it was here in our own land, it would at least encourage us. It would at least awaken that spirit of looking on the abouts of that skull.
So you have said that the oldest human skull was discovered here in Africa, in Tanzania, which was formerly Tanganyika. So by that, could there be a possibility that actually the Adam we are reading in the Bible was Africa?
I think there could be a possibility, because in the Bible we are not given so much about the whereabouts of Adam. We are only told that he died at such and such an age, but we do not know the whereabouts of Adam. So since that the Bible, which is also fallen, is telling us that Adam was the first person to be created, that means there is a possibility that that skull was even of Adam. If it was found here in Africa,
you mean that even the Garden of Eden was once in Africa?
Do you think there are some forces that could have brought that skull here, or the possibility is that that skull that was found here in Africa, that person should have died there in Africa? That means there is a possibility. As I can tell you, Africa is the cradle of human civilization. We cannot deny that. Fire was innovated here in Africa. We were writing here in Africa. By the time these people came to conquer our continent, they found us with our own history. We had folks, we had stories, we could gather around the fireplaces, such that our history is being passed on from one generation to another. But all these things are being squandered away. They are just fading out because of the technology. If we Africans can stay concerned on our own history, a great legacy can be created.
So you mean that history is not just only about the past, but it's about something, some information that gives you a sense of pride in your own identity, to give the self-respect, and it is as important as also in creating the future.
As we are in the topic of creating legacy, that's why I've gone somehow back to bring you or to portray to you an image that you cannot create a legacy when you do not know yourself. As Africans, we need to first discover ourselves, because actually we already discovered ourselves, because we knew what was all about us. Only that these things have just started getting lost from our minds because of the Western influence. So we are on the topic of legacy, or on how to create legacy, on the reason as to why we should create legacy. We should create a legacy because a legacy helps us to know to which sense of directions are we heading, to know our purpose in life. So without all this information about us, or without the history about us as Africans, creation of a legacy can be a milestone to reach.